Joining us now to maybe give a look into what could come is Katie Stockton, founder and managing partner of Fairlead Strategies. Welcome back, Katie.
Thanks, Lawrence. Good to see you.
Good seeing you. Now, you have a whole bunch of charts. We pulled a bunch here. The first one being on Bitcoin's levels, and we also have another one that we're going to show in a bit on ETH, but they look very similar. You're seeing overbought, correct? You're seeing Bitcoin as being overbought. So let's start off here. Where is the support? Where is the resistance?
Yeah, in terms of the levels, they're actually very much in play right now in terms of resistance for Bitcoin and also ETH. For Bitcoin, it's just above 25,000. It's 25,200. And that level is based on a previous peak. And it defines the upper boundary of what's become somewhat of a trading range for Bitcoin. Now, with that overbought condition having manifested itself near resistance, it makes it more difficult for Bitcoin to clear that level decisively. And for us, decisively means it spends a couple of weeks above that level, and that would be a pretty major breakout for Bitcoin. So at least there's that potential with it so close by, and yet the overbought condition would suggest that that resistance is left intact. We're watching a couple of things as support. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to ask about the support. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. In terms of support, we're watching the 200-day moving average in part. If you have the weekly chart up, we're sort of equating that to the 40-week moving average. It's just shy of 20,000. And so you can see that the risk reward isn't great right now for long positions in Bitcoin, just given the nature of resistance looming somewhat close by and the distance to support. It's sort of an interim support level within what we think to be a trading range. So we actually have a neutral intermediate term bias sort of within the context of that range. But like I said, if we were to see a breakout, we would certainly be respectful of that breakout. And then, of course, conversely, with room right now to support, there is some downside still.
Quickly, we'll take a look at the ETH chart as well. You see, it almost looks the same thing, like the same thing. I had to do a couple of double takes there because it looks they look exactly alike, don't they? Again, support and resistance here.
Right. So for ETH, I mean, listen, they are very similar in the way they set up. And that's because I think in part it's a very sort of top-down oriented market. And that goes for not just cryptocurrencies, but asset classes more broadly. It's when macro forces are really driving price action as opposed to sort of the fundamental value of things. So ETH does look just like Bitcoin. The range there is defined by resistance around 1670. And then also support. We're watching first the 50-day moving average. It has been somewhat relevant for ETH in the past. It's quite close by. If it's taken out, it's around 1566, I believe. If it's taken out, then like Bitcoin, we're watching that 200-day moving average. So, the resistance is really looming so close by for ETH that, again, that overbought condition tells us to stay on the sidelines for now unless we see some decisive breakout.
And what's interesting is that when you look at the price of Bitcoin in terms of ETH, it's almost flatlining. That tells us that they're moving in tandem, correct? And I kind of want to just flash that on the screen for a second, but that's kind of what that looks like. But then if one were to go to the next chart, forgive me if I'm wrong, that's correct, right? That they're sort of flatline.
I would call it like middling if you compare the two. Yeah. We've had swings in both directions. It seems to reflect somewhat of a neutral or fickle type of environment where it's not decisively risk on, not decisively risk off. If anything, the ratio does have upside momentum that would favor Bitcoin, but it's been neutral as of late.
Yeah, and that last chart there that we just showed is I love these charts the most. You're basically showing the alts against Bitcoin, and what we're seeing here, it seems, is that Bitcoin looks to be continuing to outperform all the alts that you're measuring except for one.
Here's the thing about that. That's a very, very short-term view. And what we're using it for is to look at the trajectory of the altcoins versus Bitcoin. And it helps us understand if we're likely to move into more of like a risk-off mode or a risk-on mode. And that to me is sort of somewhat informational. And for us, we feel that risk-off is more likely. And that's in part based on what we're seeing from the equity market as well. A pullback has developed there in response to overbought conditions. And when you see equities pull back, you often, of course, see positively correlated Bitcoin and others pull back as well. So it's a gauge of sort of risk off at this time.
Katie, so it's kind of been interesting, just to move away from the technical analysis for one moment. We've had a lot of kind of bad regulatory news in the United States, a lot of SEC crackdowns. And at the same time, Bitcoin had been rising in that same period. I'm just curious if you think that that's just, like, we've heard totally different views on this, right? Like, some people are like, well, somehow the SEC news is bullish. I don't quite get that logic, but there's definitely people who say that. And there's other people that are saying that, like, Bitcoin just doesn't care. It's doing its own thing. I'm just curious what your take is. I mean, is there any correlation at all between what's happening on the regulatory front and Bitcoin's price, which is moving kind of in an unexpected direction?
Yeah, I mean, January was sort of unexpected in my work for a lot of risk assets. It was much stronger than I would have imagined within the context still of a bear market cycle. And that included cryptocurrencies. I don't know if or how it would relate necessarily to the regulatory environment and news that's been out there of late. The charts won't really give us that answer. But what we did see is this sort of massive sentiment shift. And that occurred to the benefit of risk assets and obviously drove a pretty major up move into those resistance levels for Bitcoin and for Ether. And now they're kind of at this challenged place because sentiment got to the place from a technical perspective that you look at it from a contrarian standpoint, meaning that people got overly bullish is what it's saying. So we have a measure. This is actually something that is measurable. So it's not just anecdotal. But the measure went to this extreme greed level. So we have an oscillator. It has an extreme greed level, and it hadn't been reached since late 2021. So certainly, deserves some attention, and would suggest that that up move is really a reflection of sentiment more than anything else.
All right, Katie. Thank you for your insights. Overbought and frothy out there. That was Fairlead Strategies founder and managing partner, Katie Stockton.